Welcome to Mondays with Tara and André. Today's topic, boundaries, rules, and agreements in non-monogamy. We'll be starting in just a second. Hello,
Are we on?
hello, André. We are
Hey, Tara.
on. Hi.
How are you? Hello, everybody.
Hi. Happy Mondays with Tara and André.
You and your joyful Mondays.
I love Mondays. I mean,
I know
today's
you
a
do.
particularly exciting and busy day, but I was having technical difficulties just before we started. So I was like, oh no, we're not going to start on time.
It's amazing that we don't have more technical difficulties, and I love the way you troubleshoot them. If it were left up to me, I think we'd be gathering on the street corner and just, talking from a soapbox. But
Oh my God,
here we
you're
are.
so funny.
Mhm.
Okay, well, happy Monday.
Hello.
Happy Monday. So today's topic, as I said, is boundaries, rules, and agreements in consensual non-monogamy. Or maybe I didn't say what the topic was. I probably
No, I don't think so. Not yet. Let's hear it. What is today's topic?
Boundaries, rules, and agreements in
Mhm.
consensual non-monogamy 101.
Mhm.
So,
Yes. No, go on.
I was just going to say, if anyone's watching us, please live or in the replay, please say hello in the chat and let us know that you can hear us and everything is great today. And if you are listening, you can also let us know if you are a newbie, a poly newbie.
You know, Tara, it's so interesting because when we come on to do these lives, we have a little prompt on the corner that shows how many people are watching us. And often it looks like there's, only one or two or three or four people. And then later on, I hear from other people like, oh, yeah, we're watching your lives the other day. We're watching it. So, it's so interesting because while it's happening live, it might feel to you and I that people aren't there, but yet many people are talking. And I wonder, we're going to talk today about agreements and boundaries and announcing our positions, but I wonder how many people do tune in, but might be shy to say hello or, are somewhat reserved in wanting to express how they feel outside of you and I. There is a life outside of you and I, how they might feel in their relationships. And do they feel comfortable announcing what they're wanting and not wanting? And that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today.
Yeah, awesome. I think sometimes people kind of like watch in the replay or they don't announce that they're watching. So I think that sort of happens sometimes. So,
yeah. So hello to everyone who is
watching. I was going to try to put a prompt in the group to invite everyone to come, but for some reason it's not showing that we're live on our Facebook group. So whatever.
We're live somewhere in the universe.
I know we're live. It's just maybe not coming up. So as for those of us who are joining us and maybe don't know us, a little bit of an introduction probably. So I'm Tara Lynn Franco. I am what I call a relationship and awesomeness coach, and I specialize in coaching individuals and couples on polyamory and consensual non-monogamy.
And you do it in such an awesome way. It's true. You are an awesomeness coach. And I'm André. I'm a sex-positive psychotherapist.
Fantastic. And we're the co-founders of an online community called Let's Talk Polyamory, which we started in the pandemic. Yeah. And we started it because our passion is to help couples and individuals open up and create secure polyamorous relationships. And so you see us live or in the replay. And we do this every Monday, and we share all of our hot tips on how to navigate and have an amazing open relationship like ours, and like the people that we help in our practices. And
like ours, that's interesting you said, because just last night, I had a date with somebody, and we were talking about our relationship, you and I, our relationship.
Yeah. And what did you say?
Well, they were like, they wanted to know how you were and what it was like, because they are aware that you and I live in two different cities quite often, and the level of transparency. And I was telling them about how fantastic it was that you were out and you had met somebody the good old fashioned way. You just ended up speaking to them, and then you had a bit of a day date, and who knows where it'll go. But it was fantastic in that way. And they were kind of like taken back, and like, well, you guys know about that, and like each other's intimate parts like that. And I said, yeah, we talk about everything openly. And they were kind of taken back. She goes, wow, like I wonder, how I'd be able to be in a relationship like that. And I said, well, if you announce that that's what you're wanting, and you find a partner who's also able to communicate those things, then you could have that very same thing as well. And that, I told them also that you were aware that I was on this date with them, and you were on board with that, and how different the relationship was, that it was so open and honest, and how I had come from a place where I was don't ask, don't tell. They didn't know that I wasn't telling them, and they didn't know that I was something that they wouldn't ask. But basically, it was evasive, and it felt kind of icky at times. It didn't feel as open and honest. But also how it spoke to my level of attachment, or rather my avoidance in attachment, and how anxious I would get. And now this form of relating, this openness, this honesty, has allowed me to become much more secure in a relationship. Yeah. So they also saw that and said, well, then I could do something similar for myself. So yeah, it's possible for people to do that.
Yeah, it's been amazing. It's been amazing 6+ years now. And in fact, the person that I met organically at a cafe, they were kind of blown away by this idea of polyamory. They sort of hadn't really heard the term. They were kind of aware of it. And once we started digging in, I found out, because they're not newer to Canada. They came just before the pandemic, but has a partner back in their home country. And I was sort of saying, what is your arrangement with them? Mm-hmm. And so we had this whole discussion about don't ask, don't tell. And so I'm actually excited to dig in a little bit more and ask some more questions. But they were kind of blown away by this concept of non-monogamy and consensual non-monogamy, and how, we know what's going on in our lives. We know when we're dating. We obviously don't share private details about our partners, but it's completely open and honest. And so, I was sort of asking them about their partner and what do they know? And, they think that the partner knows that there's stuff going on. How could they not? But I don't think they've actually talked about it. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, it totally changes things, right? When we are willing and able to have these open discussions about it, because we might assume that they know, and maybe we want them to know, but until it's actually discussed openly, we don't really know that they know. And then also, unfortunately, it can lead to miscommunications. It can lead to feelings of not really knowing where we are, feelings of mistrust, not having that sense of security. It can, in fact, make us feel much more insecure. So it is, we advocate for the idea of being open and transparent and talking about these things. And it might feel kind of awkward or maybe even taboo in the beginning, but in time, you'll see that that is a very viable way, and it makes you feel much more comfortable in your skin. Well, at least I'll say from my way, it makes me feel much more secure in being able to announce what my desires are and what I'm willing to participate in and what I'm not.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So that's a really good segue into today's topic. But just before I do that, it is Cyber Monday. And so maybe people are online buying some really cool things and really cool deals. But in case you didn't see it, we still have our Black Friday, Cyber Monday offer available to you until tonight at 11:59 p.m. It is going to go away. Basically, what we're offering people is a sneak peek into our Poly Newbies course, which is a 7-module course specifically designed with people who are new to polyamory, exploring polyamory, or just curious about it, with the idea that it gives you all the essential elements to set up your relationship for success. And in fact, I say exploring consensual non-monogamy, but when you look at the actual content, a lot of it would be suited to any relationship, being monogamous or other. So there's some really great foundational things in there. So we wanted to give people a chance to take a sneak peek into the course, see what's there, maybe take in a training or kind of view what's out there. And then for those that opt in for this offer, there is a secondary special bonus for you to continue your access. So, but you have to sign up before 11:59 p.m. because it's just going to disappear off the internet.
You bring up a very good point. Yes, these things that we speak about in here are not exclusive to open relating or polyamory, right? They are transferable to many different aspects of our life. So we talk about different attachment styles. We talk about communication patterns, the way we can communicate, all these types of things. They can definitely be transferred into different relationships we have in our life, professionally, as far as our family, our friends, coworkers, all of that.
Yeah. And in fact, we picked today's topic on boundaries, rules, and agreements because our deep dive training this afternoon for the Poly Newbies course, which we're going to live record and then upload to the site by later today, is on this topic of boundaries, rules, and agreements. So why don't we just jump in?
Let's do it.
All right. So I think what happens often when people open up a relationship, you get all excited. I know we were excited when we first started. You're like, let's get online. Let's find some people to date. You know what I mean? You get really excited about the sort of pleasurable things that are going to come up, right? And really that's what you focus on. And then, you know, you get into action and then like all of a sudden you're like, whoa, all these unanticipated things that you're feeling that you never imagined you'd feel because, you know, your partners now, you either see your partner, if you're in more of a swinging or threesome situation, you see your partner with somebody else, or if you're doing things separately, they're out on a date and you're sitting there left with your feelings.
Yeah, absolutely. If you've never been in that type of situation before, it might be very difficult to imagine what you would feel, right? You might only know that once you get there. And by that time, in a sense, it could be too late. I didn't know I'd be feeling so jealous or what to do with these feelings. Now, what do I do? And, you know, panic might set in. You might go into action. There's a whole bunch of things. Whereas if you were to have them laid out for you, if you were to explore them prior, then you'd be in a much better position to anticipate how you might feel and what you might do should you have these feelings that are disruptive or, you know, a little bit overwhelming.
Yeah, because I think what happens as soon as you get those feels, one or both of the people, usually one person is like pumping on the brakes, and then you set up these rules, like usually pretty strict rules, sometimes really unrealistic, that are meant to protect you from those feelings, but actually don't do that. So
yeah, very often those rules, those kind of rules or those things that we implement can be overcompensating, right? Because we feel the reaction of something. So then we go the other way and we say, okay, well, that's it. We'll never do that. We'll never have any of this. We'll never do any of those things. But there might be another way about it, right?
Oh, absolutely. So I'm curious for those watching in live or in the replay, if you have any, if this happened to you and if you had set up some rules right off the top in hopes of supporting, feeling more secure in your relationship. But I think it's good I think we should jump in and define the difference between boundaries, rules, and agreements. Because, you know, if you've been in any sort of group or have talked with people about it, people often use all three of these things interchangeably, and they're very different.
Yeah, without a doubt. So what would you like to say? Do you have like some nice, concise definition that we might be able to share with that?
Do I have definitions? Do we have definitions? Of course we do. And we're going to go into all these things more deeply in our training for our course. But let's start with boundaries, because I think that is one of the terms that people often will be like, oh, these are our boundaries. I don't know how many times I've heard that term, but boundaries are actually personal. They are not, your boundaries relate to you, focuses on you. So what you need, what you're comfortable with, who you are, how you want to be treated, and what you want in life. Like you think of a boundary as, like, in general, a boundary is a line that marks the limits of an area. So for a person, they're sort of like the imaginary lines we draw around ourselves that kind of protect ourselves, maintain balance, protect our bodies, our minds, our emotions, our time. The
demarcation of our property where we exist.
Exactly. Yeah. So they define and identify permissions and ways that others can behave towards us. Right. So I like to. Oh, were you going to say something?
Well, I was just going to say to the earlier point about these are our boundaries. So boundaries are personal, and when it becomes our, that's more of an agreement. We agree to these boundaries. We agree to these things. These are an agreement, right? So boundaries really, they're what allow us to express ourselves confidently in what we're wanting and not wanting in life.
Yeah. So one of the diagrams we use in our training is this layers idea. So if you think of yourself as the center, and you think about your sort of outstretched arms. Oh, people can't see my arms. You can see it in the backstage, your outstretched arms, and sort of like everything that's beyond your reach, I guess, of your arms is sort of what you might consider as strangers. So they don't come into your personal space necessarily, but you may have specific boundaries around that. And then you start moving in towards you, and you have acquaintances, which might be more physically close to you and emotionally close to you, friends and family, your intimate relationships, and then, of course, yourself.
You know, it's so interesting to observe this, how we stand, our body language, right? When we are next to strangers, we will unconsciously adapt a certain position. And as the person becomes more intimate, our body language will shift, right?
Yeah.
So our body's announcing how we feel about these people, where we might stand next to them in an elevator, etc. But then it becomes much different when we articulate them, and when they're much more intimate, right? When we have this familiar knowledge of the person and the boundaries of ourselves, how we are announcing our preferences in these.
Yeah, I mean, before we started in this whole realm of consensual non-monogamy, I kind of knew my boundaries, but I actually didn't sit down and write what they are. And it's a really important exercise because it's good for yourself to know them, and it allows you to the exercise we have in the course really allows you to dig into why those are important to you, and then work on your beliefs around those particular boundaries. Because I think that's what people get into. You get into the situation. If you don't believe that your boundaries are important and that others shall respect them, or you don't feel comfortable announcing them, then others may not be aware of them, and they might trounce on them without you even knowing. So it's really good to articulate them and work on those things. And that's part of the exercise we talk about in the program.
Absolutely, right. So we become informed, we become more self-aware of what we're wanting, not wanting, where our boundaries lie, and then we're able to communicate it in a much more concise way, and something that feels as though it attunes to what we're wanting and not wanting. And then in time, hopefully they are also doing that work, and they'll be able to tell us what their boundaries are.
Exactly. And while we can share our boundaries, it's up to the other person to then, it's left sort of into their hands as to how they're going to react to your boundaries. And related then, and then that might inform you as to how you might want to react or interact or not interact with that person.
Yeah, it becomes very consensual then, right? So I put it out there. I've informed myself as to what they are, and now I inform you, and you can abide by them and recognize my boundaries, or you can not really have them, and then, well, we'll see where that takes us. And it usually doesn't take us in the right direction, right? But when we are able to comfortably announce them and we see the other boundaries, then we can consent to participate in that and feel much more secure.
Exactly. And having said that, I mean, sometimes we have to tell people our boundaries more than once. And that's fair, because not everybody remembers. And I don't think, generally, I don't think people's intention is to step on our boundaries. But sometimes we do have to remind people. And so it's fine to remind, but then you have to pay attention, obviously, if it continues to be ignored or, that sort of thing. That's when you might have to do something else.
Right. So you like to go with the optimistic point of view that they are coming to you with a pure, open heart, and they're wanting to. But even if they should stumble once or twice, we still remind them gently. But then if we see that it's a recurring pattern and they're not wanting to invest in what's important to us, well, then we say, well, this person is really not considering what my boundaries are, and maybe they're not the best choice.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be prepared to take action. And if we don't take action, then it can send the message to others that, our needs aren't important. And so it is really super important to know your personal boundaries, but also communicate them and consistently communicate them.
Right. And the first level of taking action for me, my preference is to articulate it, right? To talk about it, to let it be known. And then we take other actions depending on how that plays out.
Yeah, and in our training, we give examples of how to do this. So in terms of boundaries, there's a couple different ways to approach boundaries. Some people use write out no statements, or I don't want, like I don't want to be spanked. for example, or no touching my underarms or something like that. I don't know anybody like that. But you can give an example. Like one of my examples is I like to do it in terms of how rather than being like don't and no, I like to phrase it in the how it fits within my values. So one of my values is privacy. So because one of my values is privacy, I do not send sexy or nude images of myself with a person before I meet them or in early stages of the relationship.
Wouldn't every picture you send of yourself be sexy? No, but it's great, right? So you are able to announce what it is you're not going to tolerate, what you're not going to want beforehand.
Yeah, and the other part of that is I also don't want them sent to me. That's the other bit of that. And so I do tell people that boundary because because
how might you frame it in the positive? So say, for example, you wouldn't want your hair being touched, right? Some people like to touch hair, other people don't want to touch. How might you frame that in the positive? What could you offer them to let them know of your boundary, your preference there? How would you frame that?
Yeah, you can add the why it's important to you or what it means to you. So I don't enjoy, I guess I don't enjoy my hair being touched.
Right.
Because when it makes me feel uncomfortable.
So I prefer not having my hair fondled or messed up or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I mean, it could be anything, right? And people might do it innocently, like not even pulling your hair. Like some people don't like their hair to be stroked. I have a client who was subject to some abuse as a child, and so she doesn't like her back being gently tickled, which for most people would be like, "Ooh, that sounds nice," but for that person, it is the most uncomfortable thing. So she feels that she when we were discussing this, one of the things she asked me for help on was how to express that particular boundary in a sexy way, she said. Yeah. And this is where this whole idea around beliefs around your boundaries came up, because I think people wouldn't intentionally, if you knew that that would trigger some sort of negative emotion in me, obviously you wouldn't want to do that. I don't think people would intentionally want to do that. Hopefully so that was the part we actually worked on, is the belief part, because it's like the belief that people who I want to be with will want to know and understand my boundaries and how they impact me. So absolutely. That's kind of the thing behind that.
But you raise a very good point. This particular person did not like to have that action done to them, where perhaps the majority of people would love having that thing done. So it really is about the individual. And when we are able to announce or receive what these boundaries are, then it tells us who we are with, and we should be able to tune ourselves to that, right? So like you say, we're hopefully there for each other's enjoyment. We enjoy being friends with each other. We wouldn't want to do things that would make them feel uncomfortable or off-put in any way. So by using these boundaries, by communicating it, by being able to send and receive them, we can become more in tune to what they want. So we assume most people would love to have their back petted that way, but some people don't. And then we see the individual for their preferences, and it makes them feel seen, and then it makes them feel more secure. They're recognized that way. And then we inform them, well, I like to have my back touched. Well, then they can choose, they can consent to do that or not as well. But it helps to create a feeling of security, of being understood, of being seen.
Do you have any boundaries that you'd like to share? Putting you on the spot, because you usually put me on the spot.
I think I'm pretty open. I think it really depends on the situation and who I'm with, right? So there are things that I might not want individuals to do, or things that I might want to do, but I think it's on a case-by-case basis. I'll see if I can come up with an example for you.
Okay. So that's another good point. So your boundaries may only apply to, it may be different depending on the person and your level of intimacy with them. So some things might be like perfectly okay in really close, intimate relationships. But say, for example, you are more of a lifestyle swinger type person and you go to a club, you may not want that same thing. Like I'm happy for you to spank me, for example, But I wouldn't want a complete stranger that I've never had a discussion with and anything to do that at a party or a club or something like that without first having a discussion.
Sure. And not only is it to the circumstance, I would imagine that it's true too of the person. So you might be wanting to have your ass slapped at that time, but maybe another time you and I together, it's not the time that you're wanting it, right? So you might say, well, I've consented to this in the past and I liked it, but at this time I'm not wanting that, which is another aspect of it, which is so critically important, that we have the right to change our mind at any time. It could even be in the moment of the scene. And you might say, you know what, suddenly I'm not wanting this anymore. Stop, no. And no always means no, not come on, babe, just a couple more seconds or whatever. We're always within our rights and we needn't have to justify it or explain it. We simply say no or stop, and that is that. That's important because that is part of our boundaries, right? Now I've announced my boundary has changed, and what was permissible before, for whatever reasons, is no longer the way I feel. And I don't have to justify it. I am justified within my own rights. Everyone is, to say, this is what I'm wanting now. And I might consent in the future, but at this moment, this is how I feel about it.
Yeah, and that speaks to consent and ongoing consent. And it's actually reminded me, it's an interesting conversation I had with my new friend, who's completely not really familiar with lifestyle swinging, polyamory. And one of the things that they asked me like a million questions. They were so curious about this. And they said, so if you go to a party, like a sex party, does that mean like anybody can have sex with you? They can touch you, whatever, at any time? And I'm like, no. I said, they have to ask, they have to consent. Like someone can't just come up to you and touch you. They have to first ask. And he said, and I said, every time. And he was really surprised. And I was like, yeah, no, it's not a free for all orgy. I mean, there's sometimes subtle ways of asking and connecting in those situations, but generally like actually saying the words and asking, may I touch you? May I do this? Until the person says, it's okay, you can do whatever you want, until I say no, or whatever they might say, then it's all about consent. And so I forget that sometimes. So it's an important thing to remember and remind people of.
Well, I'm just thinking how fortunate it is that he should come across you as someone to introduce him to these things, because you are so comfortable with the subject and you are so articulate in that. But I'm also curious if when you told him that you were in open relating or polyamory or swing, whatever it is, how you announced it, does he then automatically have this thought, well, oh, that means she's promiscuous and we can, start getting intimate rather quickly? Does it influence how you might be received?
I think for some people it may influence, and you see that on the dating sites when you run into people who would more generally identify as monogamous, and then they find out that you're polyamorous. There might be that assumption, but I quickly put that assumption to rest when I said that that's not the case. And I think he was surprised when I said that I don't actually go out and date and seek out multiple partners like all the time. I said, it's just not something that I'm doing right now. But I enjoy the relationships I have. And that's where it is. So I think that they were quite surprised that that was the situation. Surprised and maybe disappointed. I don't know. We'll find out.
But it's interesting because when we look at relating on the spectrum and we look at the emotional investment and the sexual investment and how those things are on spectrums, we see a lot of people who are in open relating who are asexual or have a minimal amount of physical or sexual contact, and yet are still very much polyamorous, right? They're very much into open relating. So yeah, just because we're open that way doesn't necessarily mean that we are necessarily going to sleep with everybody in the first hour of meeting them.
Absolutely.
Sometimes we might, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's an automatic thing.
Yeah, and absolutely. And for me, I think my sexuality, and because of my age and hormones and things like that, it does fluctuate. So I love meeting new people. I was very excited to meet a handsome man at a cafe organically. And, that was pretty exciting. But like my first thought was not, oh yeah, when are we going to have sex? Like, absolutely not. I'm just like, wow, a new person. Cool. Because I love that aspect of having new friends and new relationships. And that's what I was explaining to him, is that really the biggest benefit for me is like the number of friends and people that love me in my life has expanded exponentially. And to me, that's really the thing that I've come to value the most. The sexual part is like, right now for me is kind of like, yeah, it's okay, but I'm also happy just being with you too. You know what I mean? So
just being with me.
well, I don't mean it like that. I think you know what I mean. Like, I'm happy just to have occasional other partners and, you all the time,
But absolutely, the connection part is for me the most fantastic thing, right? Whether we have sex or not, it's like a bonus or it's another added feature. But it's the connection, right? We are social creatures by nature, and being able to have that and have that flirtation, that tension, that intimacy is a wonderful thing, no doubt.
Yeah.
So but what's also interesting to me is last night, recounting how you had met this person, I was also very aware of my level of compersion, the joy that I had in your having these relations, and you're having this joy in meeting this person. And a lot of that does come from the idea of having more secure attachment in the relationship. So even though we're in different cities, it would be the perfect ground for jealousy to really grab hold and go wild with it. And yet instead of that, I feel secure because we have a safe haven, a secure base. We can go about and come back because we want to be with each other, and it changes it entirely. Not as though I feel as though contractually we have this agreement and it forbids you from going and doing all these other explorations. And what would really be the difference whether or not you flirted with somebody at a cafe or played tennis and had deeper, covert relations or emotions or feelings towards this person, right? So it's the idea that you are free and willing and able to do your own thing. And should you come back, you choose to come back, it's because you want to be with me. And I feel secure in the knowledge that while you're with somebody else, having feelings for them, loving them, whatever, it doesn't mean that you no longer love me. Love is a drive. It's an endless source. It doesn't say, well, I only have so much to go around. I don't say, well, if I love my mother, I'm not going to have enough love for my father and my brothers and sisters. I'm able to love and keep loving and receive more and more loving. And it doesn't threaten me. It doesn't make me feel small or insignificant. In fact, it does just the opposite. It makes me feel as though there's an abundance of love around me. And I love that feeling.
Yeah, me too. Okay, we talked so much about boundaries and all the other things that we haven't talked about rules and agreements. So maybe we should talk about those and differentiate, because it is the thing that people often get boundaries, rules, and agreements. The terms are used interchangeably. So I think we got boundaries being that they're personal. So rules.
Well, let's do agreements first, because I know you have something to say about rules. So agreements, like we said about the boundaries, right? So what we do is we establish what is good for me, what's not good for me, and then I share it with you, and then you tell me what's good for you and not good for you, and you share it with me, and we say, well, here's some overlap. We both we don't want our backs to be messed up with, or we don't want our hair to be fondled, whatever. So we have an agreement not to do that. We consent to each other's things, right? I let it be known, you let it be known, and I say, no, I'm sorry, that's not part of my deal. I'm glad that you like that, but that's not my scene, and we don't have that agreement. But in these other parts, we've let it be known what's working for us, what doesn't, and we have our boundaries. We offer them to the other person, and then we have the agreement on it.
Exactly. So agreement is basically an arrangement, a contract, for lack of a better words, in which people agree what is to be done, or they share the same common idea around something. So it's to agree to something is to say that you will do something, accept something, allow something that is suggested or requested by the other person.
Or it could be refraining from doing something.
Or refraining, exactly. So, and the important part of agreements is that they're made and agreed to by all parties that are impacted them, rather than something that's being enforced or put upon you. And so you made a good point there. The relationship to our boundaries is our boundaries often relate to things that we value, what are important to us as people. But we may also have values that we have in relationships. So that's where, when we developed our values-based agreement model, that is the foundation of how we set up agreements.
Right.
So based on values that you share with your partners, you agree to, and you come up with a plan of what you'll say and do to bring about those values in your relationship.
Mm.
So for example, one of the things that I know we value, is our sexual health.
Mm.
So as a result of that value of our sexual health, we get tested regularly, and we ask that our partners do the same and share with us their results. So that's part of our agreement. So you're happy to know, and I'm guessing you probably did the exact same thing on your date.
I did.
Carefully slipped in. Actually, I didn't even have to carefully slip in.
I wasn't careful. I pulled the bandage off. I said, let's talk about STI testing.
Is that what you said?
Right in the middle of it. We were like, on the couch, enjoying a drink. And we were talking about, I think it was coming off the heels of your having met this person. And I said, well, let's talk about STI testing. And her response was, you talk about that every time we get together. And I was like, well, I'm glad to talk about it. Let's talk about it directly. Let's address that, because it's part of my feeling secure. I want to feel that way. And I want to know that I've done my due diligence, that we have talked about it, and there's honesty and transparency. And also, for me, a big part of the STI testing is I want it to be normalized. I want it to be part of the discussion. It's not a moral thing. If I had a cold, we wouldn't attach a moral judgment. And many of these STIs are viruses, right? So why should it be any different than the flu virus? Let's just talk about it as adults without moral judgment to it. And then we can feel secure and safe in that.
Yeah, I think that's why they changed the term from STDs, so sexually transmitted diseases, to sexually transmitted infections.
Semantics, infection. I mean, it's there's a bug, there's a virus, there's a thing, there's a whatever.
The disease sounds like scarier. Like it's
infection sounds much better.
Infection or.
How about
I don't know. I think it sounds better than a disease. A disease sounds more like it's harder to overcome, whereas infection's like, I can get some antibiotics or do this and get over it. So I don't know.
What about sexually transmitted considerations?
STCs?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I did talk to my partner about my partner, not my partner at all. This new person I met.
That's interesting.
That was don't even go there.
I will. What do words mean, right? Why play with them? Why bother?
There's no negative in the unconscious.
So let's get back on the page here if we can. So
we talked about agreements based on values. So agreed to by all people. It's come to together, something you come to together.
Right. So tell me about your feelings and your ideas about rules.
So I think the difference is on rules. Rules are basically a statement about what's allowed or what will not happen, what is not allowed or allowed, and they're enforced. And I know when you say it like that, it sounds a bit subtle, but usually rules are like putting limits on behavior, or it's behavior or on the relationship. And often they're based, like we said earlier, on one person's perception of how they will feel when faced with certain circumstances.
Yeah, and they're put in there to create a sense of security, but often there's another underlying feeling of it being punitive, right? If you break this rule, this will happen, as opposed to we both have an understanding and we both value this and we come to the agreement of it. It is consensual.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, sometimes people make agreements and call them rules, but I really like to make a distinction, because rules are like, and if you've been bad, punitive, and they're often sometimes not even realistic. People set up rules and then rules tend to be broken, I think. If you come to agreement based on what you value in your relationship, not to say you're not going to break it, but I feel like it might be, the mindset around it might be trickier. Maybe you're not going to agree to things that you really don't believe. Whereas a rule, you might say, okay, fine, I'll agree to that, and then I'll go do something else.
Right. So it seems for me, the difference in the rule is that one is imposed upon you, and then you kind of have to submit to it, where in agreements, it seems much more consensual. We've both formulated this. But in that mindset, in the consideration of mindset, what would prompt somebody then to want to make a rule? because, I think we enact it, we erect a rule so that we create this perception of security. Somehow a rule, because of it, is so strong in its announcement, because there is a possible consequence, punitive action to it, it will be enforced. It's meant to create this feeling, right? That it's trying to address an insecurity.
Yeah. But you're asking why people would do that?
Yeah. What do you think what would prompt them? Like what's an example of one of the rules that would create this sense of security?
I think people are just used to having rules put upon them. Like people don't really talk about agreements in relationships, I think. So you're used to, in school, like, don't do this, don't do that, do this, you know what I mean? So like one of the rules that people have is, I've heard this one is, well, this could be a rule, like no sex on the first date, and maybe that's something that you're okay to agree to. But what if the circumstance changes?
Yeah,
and
maybe. But the question is, for me, no sex on the first date, when we announce it that way, what is it really about? So we make this agreement, this rule that says no sex on the first date, but what is the aim of that? What motivates us to say something like that? Well, am I somehow concerned or afraid that if there was sex on the first date, that then they're going to somehow catch feelings or something is going to change? But how would it be any different on the second, fifth, or 25th date?
Exactly.
So really, what is my motive in wanting to create this rule and wanting to enforce it? What do I imagine it's going to do for me? How will it protect me?
Yeah, I mean, that's the point. I don't think it does. And if the person then has sex in the first date, then what? You know what I mean? But what if like I prefer to have the agreement around sexual health and safety and all those things. Those are more important rather than the fact that you have sex on the first date. Like, it doesn't, those things to me are more important. Right. And I think ultimately make me feel more secure.
But for me, as you say that, it makes me think, well, if we have this idea that, we have the agreement that we're not going to have sex on the first date, it's that we both had this thing that we recognize as valuable. There was a reason why we both wanted to do it, as opposed to I make this rule, no sex on first date, because I feel insecure, and now I'm wanting you to invest in my insecurities, in a sense, right? As opposed to being able to unpack it, explore it, and find other ways of being secure without having to implement these rules that might not really be so viable.
Yeah. And while we say that both people might agree to it, often the no sex on the first date is usually one person's desire. I don't think maybe it could be two, but I think generally it's because one person is feeling insecure, but they're like, okay, I'll feel okay if I know that this is your first date and you're not going to have sex with the person. I mean, another one I've heard, another rule is that I must let my partner know before it progresses to a certain stage. So you're out on a date, it could be the first date, could be the second date, could be third date. A couple, they told us that they would talk to their partner and they would set up the expectations. Okay, I'm going on this date. It's the second date. It's not going to proceed past making out and maybe some fondling. You know what I mean? And if they say that and then they go on the date and things turn out the way they are, they feel comfortable, they feel excited. If they want to proceed past that, they have to then contact the other person first. Like almost like a permission.
Well, yeah, but to be the devil's advocate, wouldn't that also fall into the category of checking in and making sure that your partner is okay? So we set out one way, but now it's changed, and I want to check in with you to find out how you feel about it. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Is it going to kind of be in the moment putting pressure on me as the recipient to that? Is it okay if I go forward, or does it kind of negate the agreements? I'm wondering how that would affect the situation, how it would affect the relationship.
Yeah, I think checking in is cool, but I think if it's a permission thing, then the question begs the question, what do you do if the person says no?
Yeah. But also it's unpacking it in the moment, right? So it can, there's a whole bunch of implications, as opposed to being able to have it on much more neutral ground, where there's not this, okay, let me find out first and then I'll get right back to you. It kind of takes off a lot of the pressure of being able to explore it when it's not unfolding in the heat of the moment.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you might have check-ins as part of your agreement, but it might be like, as a consideration, a value of consideration, as consideration to my partner. If I expect that I'm going to be later than I said I might be, if you're nesting together, then I will let them know. Or you might even want to, at the beginning, check in partway to the date for a safety reason. Say like, hey, I'm okay, everything's good, but it's the permissioning thing. And then, like that in that moment, what would make you say yes or no to that situation? So rules, boundaries, and agreements. And we go much deeper. And this is a really great conversation. I'm glad we talked about this.
As am I.
And we go into much more detail in our Poly Newbies course, which is this module 6 is all about boundaries, rules, and agreements. We're live recording it today, and then it'll be up on the course site along with the 2 exercises related to this and setting up your values, setting up your boundaries, and then also your values-based agreements with your partners. So I'm super excited for that. So for those who are watching and didn't see it, there's just a few more hours. You have until just before midnight tonight to get your 24-hour free access to the Poly Newbies course. You can see the full training from today. It'll be up, like I said, probably by 7 o'clock tonight, and see all the other things that are in there. Take a look and then decide if the course is for you. But I think it's pretty amazing. So, and a lot of value. And for those that sign up for the free preview, there is a very special offer that you'll get related to it. So awesome. Well, thanks, Andre. That was super fun. Happy Monday. And I'll catch you at 3 o'clock when we go do the training.
I look forward to it.
Thanks, everyone, for watching. Let us know in the comments if you have any questions. And we'll chat with you again next Monday.
Bye.